Well, hello, good people. Here we go again with another rousing episode of Ask Mark Anything. Today's question that I have across me has come from Matthew Locke, who is in Bathurst. And Matthew was asking, particularly, it's a prospecting question and a very good one at that. He was asking about the just listed card. Now, Matthew's had the advantage of being to Sales Trainer Live and having been, or Sales Trainer Live, I should say, the List and Sell Tour. And having been to the List and Sell Tour, he has seen, I guess, some modifications that we've made around certain prospecting methods. So those of you that have been will know that what we focus upon at the List and Sell Tour is ensuring that we are approaching directly people who are selling as opposed to dormant property owners. So we have a categorization between the two. Active property sellers are people who are selling now or imminently, and then of course there are dormant property owners. Now, dormant property owners at the end of the day pretty much add up to names, contact details and fodder for your database, but they do not translate to listings. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that if you're new to this game and you're looking to get some of this stuff on board that you shouldn't be doing that, but indeed, sorry, just had to clean the glasses, that you should be more focused on getting directly listings, because it's listings that breed listings. And I did say that I'd make a special mention here because Hilton de Gold, who is notorious around the traps, he was very, very quick to say, or put a post up there that said souffle equals souffle. And that's his retort, if you like, to where I say more equals more. And what I mean by more equals more is it's the listings that bring the listings. And if you go back on some of these past episodes, you'll realise that that's what we've talked about at great lengths. So I'll just reiterate just here from Matthew's question. He said, Mark, I'm just wanting to see the new just listed card. And in particular, that's what we're going to be talking about here today on Property Marketer, which is a program that we have that generates these things to start the process after having been to List and Sell Melbourne. Can you discuss the importance of the regenerative prospecting process and the way it generates listings off the back of listings? Now, in a previous episode of this, I was explaining that it's the listings that bring the listings. So once you get into a state of flux, particularly once you get into double-figure listings, that's where you're listing 10 or more properties a month, well then you start to find that the listing inquiry is being generated directly off those listings. But it's the age-old question, chicken or the egg, you know, what comes first? Do we have to get the listings to get the prospects and vice versa? Well, where I find most salespeople get it wrong, again going back on a past episode, is that they tend to focus on the back end of the listing. They wait until they've gotten the result and then they grab the result and they use that to try to win the favour of some sellers. Well, what I'd like to suggest to you is that sellers are watching that listing that you have all the time. So when we talk about focusing on getting listings, the very first thing that I ask you to start to embrace in terms of thinking around the protocols that you're running is that this, when we look into catching sellers, we say if you want to catch the hunted, you must think like the prey. What does this mean? If you want to attract sellers, you must think like they do. What are they doing? Where are they frequenting? And of course, what will lure them into coming across and volunteering this information to you and then indeed wanting to list a property. And here's the thing. What active property sellers do is they see signs. Now, we all know this and we love the idea when we get a listing, we can't wait to promote it to the marketplace and say we've just recently listed a property. Now, I just have to take you back a little bit here to get you to understand what's going on. Now, in the same way as before you got into real estate, you probably noticed the odd real estate agent sign, certainly if it was in your street or if it was on a main road or otherwise. But when dormant property owners are not selling, they don't necessarily notice every sign that goes up. This is because at that point in time, they're not particularly interested in going ahead and listing a property. So if a property is listed directly opposite, they will notice it. But if it's in the next street or further down the street, if they're in a cul-de-sac, they may not. Conversely, sellers do. So in the same way that when you got into real estate, suddenly you notice there are lots of signs, this is the same phenomena that happens with a property seller. And of course, we talk about in foothold and in deed traction, the main attractor to a property seller is presence. The agent that has the most signs in the area will attract the most number of listings. So we want to take advantage of this having listed a property. So the first thing that I'm saying to you is, we don't want to be focused on listing off the back or attracting more listings off the back. We'll come to that later. We should immediately be focused the moment we list a property in leveraging off the front end of a listing. Now this of course presents the old just listed scenario to us. Now before we get into what we need to do to get it right, I want to show you what we've done in getting it wrong. You see, when a sign goes up, and if you put yourself in the position of a property seller, so if a sale sign goes up, now we've already said they're going to notice it if it's within, well, we say 50 properties, but it could be, up to a kilometre away, they'll be totally aware of the property coming to market. So if the sign comes up, and imagining that you're a seller researching the market, the very first thing that you'll do is more than likely hit the internet. So you'll go to the internet to see if you can find the property because, of course, you want to know what the property is listed for. Now you go to the internet, you can't find it. Then you move to maybe hitting an email. So you'll send an email to the agent posing as a buyer, of course, to get the information to find out roughly what the property is on the market for. And if that does you no good, then of course you will ring the agent directly. And of course you will pose as a buyer because this is the probably the most not just convenient way, but the way in which you will not least likely be harassed by the agent. And this is the thing that most property sellers fear because they're not receptive to actually having a listing presentation until such time as they're sure that their property's value will allow them to fulfill their motive. So of course, if we put a sign on it and then we send the just listed card out, so the just listed arrives in the letterbox, this seller's already secured the information that they want. What is the likelihood, given that now a just listed arrives, it says on that just listed, we've just listed a nearby property, wanted you to be the first to know, and then of course you immediately think, well, it's had a sign on it for 3-4 days, maybe 72 hours, maybe a week. Can you understand that now you've actually precluded the chance of that seller actually going ahead and calling and volunteering this information to you? But of course, if we look at the content that sits on those just listed, it surrenders the location. So to a dormant property owner who may not have noticed this property for sale, suddenly their attention is drawn to it, and then immediately they start to think to themselves, well, given that this property's for sale, and the correspondence then goes, oh, okay, there's a property for sale. Now the correspondence says it has a call to action. It says if you're considering selling in the future or you would like an updated opinion of value, give us a call. So now you've got a dormant property owner that might call to get an updated opinion of value with no intention of selling. This to me is a complete nonsense. It's ridiculous. Now, yes, I understand that it gives you fodder. Yes, I understand that it can populate your database with contact details and you can start to nurture these over a period of time. But it doesn't solve the leveraging of a listing into a listing. So what do? Well, we say that we don't want to attract dormant property owners. We want to attract sellers. So what I'm about to suggest to you, what I'm about to show you, clearly makes a very big change around the prospecting equation. We say that what you need to do in the very first instance is send the just listed correspondence into the marketplace before the sign is erected, before any advertising online or otherwise is done. So you sign the property up, you immediately prepare the just listed, and you deliver this with no other form of information, no other avenue where any prospective seller can glean this information. Now, don't worry about those dormant property owners if you want to capture those. We can pick those up a little bit later. Let me explain. The next thing that I see, as I've explained to you, is most just listeds actually reveal the location of the property. This can also cause decisions to be made fairly quickly. So one of the first things we say with the just listed is, yes, you should identify the street, but you should never identify the actual number of the property, the actual address. Why? Well, we want to get an inquiry from a prospective seller. So let's see, you get a correspondence in the letterbox and it says we've listed a property on Smith Street, which is of course of interest to you as a property seller, but it has no number. Secondly, it has no photograph of the property, which further removes any opportunity for that prospective seller to identify exactly which property we might be talking about. Thirdly, it has no call to action. If we look at the dialogue that sits around it, we do a couple of things. Now I'm about to introduce to you what we call our just listed card. It's called LA Woman. We call it LA Woman because you leave it specifically by the doors. I know that's a little bit of a play on word and a bit of fun. But importantly, what it does is it does not identify the street number whilst identifying the street. It does not identify the property by giving a picture of it, but the dialogue is what attracts the seller. So it goes pretty much like this. We have a neighbourhood announcement. So on one side of the card is an image of your signboard, a complete replication of this. You flip it over, on the other side of the signboard it says local listing announcement. You flip it over and it says, we've just listed a nearby property and we wanted the neighbours to be the first to know. So we listed a nearby property on Smith Street and we wanted you as neighbours to be the first to know. If, like the people calling, so we have an accolade there, you are researching the market ahead of selling and would like to know about this or any of our other pre-release properties, please feel free to give us a call. And whilst you're at it, don't forget to ask for our property sellers research kit. Now, this is irresistible to a seller because if a seller knows that there's a property for sale, they can't identify it, yet there is an open invitation for them to call, plus the idea of being able to be given information on other pre-release properties is suddenly presented to them. And then finally, if there's an offer for us to show them how to research the market to ascertain their price, there is every likelihood of calling. Now, the number of calls that you get back from this diminishes. It's lower than you might expect. But here's the important thing. The call is nearly always a seller. So how does this actually fit into the regenerative prospecting process? Because I said, don't panic, there is a second opportunity. If you then back it up a couple of days later, so you put this one out and then wait a couple of days and then send out an invitation to the open for inspection. Well, the open for inspection invitation goes out after the sign's been erected, after the marketing has begun. And of course, now that we have revealed the location, you're fine to go ahead and put the address of the property and indeed an image or a picture of the property, given that you have the marketing prepared. And this, of course, will still allow the dormants to be notified, perhaps attend the open house, or even get you in if you really must go for those market appraisals. But at the front end, if you do it this way with the just listed with LA Woman, you will only get calls from property sellers. Now, before I wrap this up in a quick 20-minute session and give you an indication of where it goes, I want to just allude to you how this qualifies around what we call our prospecting litmus tests. So we have 4 prospecting tests for any protocol to apply. The first is, what is the yield? For the number that you drop out, how many do you actually have to drop out before you actually receive a listing? Now, this clearly qualifies because we recommend you do around 50 properties immediately surrounding the listing that you have, knowing full well that there'll be up to 5 sellers in gestation. Now, you might not get all of these, but again, the remarkable thing is that the yield is high. So if you only got 2 or 3 calls knowing full well they're sellers, I would like to suggest to you it's been a resounding success. Secondly, the quality of the listings. Well, if you're getting calls from active property sellers researching the market, I'd like to suggest to you that the quality is second to none. So again, it gets a very big tick with that part. The cost, it is extremely cost effective. Goodness me, what does it cost you to produce a generic leaflet, if you like, whether you get it commercially printed or printed it locally, at your office and drop those out, 50 of them? The cost is pretty cheap, and the time invested is also economical, so it passes that test. And how easy is it to do? Well, look, I've got to tell you, it's a pleasure when you're actually receiving calls from property sellers who are researching the market and they are receptive to you giving them information on how it works. Now, all of this fits in nicely into what we call the regenerative prospecting process. And you can see that in the image at the back. Now, I understand, unfortunately, that it actually reverses on these live recordings, so it's pretty hard for you to go ahead and read it. You can glean this on the front end of salestrainer.com.au. Go to the freebies. You'll see a section there that actually alludes to the regenerative prospecting process, which you're welcome to have a look at. Now, it's a 10-step process, 5 of which are direct contact points that you're making across with sellers. In this instance, we're getting a listing we're immediately looking to leverage by withholding the news to the exclusion of active property sellers and getting those people to voluntarily give that information. The second shot that you get is putting out the open for inspection invitation. On another recording, I'll talk about how we jig that so that you are directly contacting active property sellers and having them come and volunteer this information. The third step is that the open for inspection itself, where we have some very clever, not just qualification techniques in terms of dialogue, but we now have some props and products that are just laying them in the aisles. Now, all of these are shared, of course, on the List and Sell Tour. There's a couple of dates coming up around the country for the remainder of the year. And of course, we share these inside of Steam with our management clients. Now, the third step at the back end of the open for inspection is another one that I'd like to talk about. I don't have time to share it here today. But again, in dialogue, I believe that we are alienating prospecting sellers because we are literally, what's the word? I had it written down here before. Sorry, I dropped it. But we're intimidating sellers or putting them off it because we're almost, the type of dialogue that we're using is invasive. Where we're saying to people, do you have to sell before you move? That sort of stuff. Well, we show you how to use assumptive closes where the seller is not even conscious of the fact that they're being qualified, but voluntarily give you this information. So when you look at LA Woman, when you look at your just listed card next time, don't be a part of the pack. Don't feel like volunteering that information is getting you listings. It may indeed be bringing you lots of leads, but those leads are most likely dormant property owners that will not convert to listings readily. If you make these changes in the front end of the regenerative prospecting process, you can look forward to listings coming your way a lot sooner. I'd be delighted if you put some questions in here. I can see many of you have done that. It's very difficult for me to sort of answer them as I'm sort of running this out, but I'll be sure and give you the answer to those questions. And next week we will be talking with a great question that came from Mrs. Sales Trainer, who's found her way into the real estate industry and left me a real estate widower, around accolades and converting testimonials into accolades so that these generate listings back to you. So thank you very much for listening. Please, again, I ask you to put those comments at the bottom and I'll be more than happy to share the answers that we have around the List and Sell Tour, or better still, go to www.salestrainer.com.au and get yourself to the List and Sell Tour as soon as you possibly can. So thanks again for joining me on another episode of Ask Mark Anything.